Just kind of some introductory notes, and then I'll introduce our panelists and we'll get into the discussion. Today is the continuation of Able Communications series on communicating in a crisis, which we began way back in March when the pandemic began and all of us started working differently and communicating differently. Now we've gotten used to Zoom and communicating in different ways. This webinar is one that we wanted to bring to our guests and partners and clients because we have taken an interest, and everyone should take an interest in mental health. And we've partnered with NAMI Metro Baltimore. NAMI stands for the National Alliance on Mental Illness. It's a national organization with many local chapters, including here in Baltimore. And our guest today is Carrie Graves, who's Executive Director of NAMI Metro Baltimore, and Amber Barnett, who's a volunteer with NAMI Metro Baltimore. And we're going to be talking about how to recognize signs and symptoms of mental illness in the workplace and how to support our colleagues and coworkers. And so with that, I will, one more thing. If you have a question, please feel free to hover down below and you'll see the ability to click on Q&A. You can ask a question in that manner, or you can chat a question to the panelists if you want to keep it private but want your question answered. We'll give the presentation for about the first 40 minutes or so and save 10, 15 minutes at the end for Q&A. And so with that, let me hand things over to Carrie Graves. Thanks, Carrie.
Great. Thank you so much, Greg. We certainly appreciate Able hosting this important webinar today, and thank you all for joining us for this conversation. I am going to pop up my screen now so that you guys can see our slides here. Okay, there we go. So today we are going to be talking about addressing mental health in the virtual workplace. And just to set the scene about a little bit more about who we are as an organization. So we, as Greg said, are the local affiliate of the National Alliance on Mental Illness. We serve Baltimore City and Baltimore County. That being said, if any of you all are located outside of Baltimore City and County, please know there's an affiliate in your area that would be able to offer resources to you as well. We offer education support and advocacy to individuals who are living with a mental health condition as well as their family members, and then education to the community. And all of our programs are non-clinical in nature. They are designed to complement the behavioral health care that each participant is receiving. All of our programs are peer-led by trained volunteers who have lived experience, and you'll get the pleasure of meeting Amber a little bit later. Our volunteers understand mental illness firsthand because they've been there, and so they use their own experiences to help our program participants work towards recovery. I want to start out today just explaining a little bit more about what is mental health, because I think it's often hard to define, especially because there can be so many different symptoms, and even with one diagnosis, someone can have different experiences with the same diagnosis. So we all experience emotional ups and downs throughout our lives, but mental health conditions go beyond those emotional reactions. It's a medical condition that affects a person's thinking, feeling, and mood. And what's so important is that the brain is not separate from the body. And so a mental health condition shouldn't be treated any differently than a physical health condition, such as diabetes or asthma or hypertension. Mental illness doesn't discriminate. It affects all genders, races, ages. And what we do know, and this is very important, is that with timely and effective treatment, recovery is possible for all individuals living with a mental health condition. Mental health conditions are common. 1 in 5 adults will experience a mental health condition in their lifetime. So it is very, very prevalent. But only 40% of those who are diagnosed are getting treatment. There's so many barriers to treatment, and that includes parity issues that affect access to care, But overall, stigma, which is what we'll be talking about heavily today, continues to be a major barrier that prevents individuals from seeking treatment. And stigma can have real consequences. In the last year, only 41% of individuals living with a mental health condition receive treatment services. And when it comes to mental health and race, there is a higher prevalence. With Black Americans, they are 20% more likely to be diagnosed with a serious mental health issue than the general population. It is estimated that 8.9 million Latinx or Hispanic identifying people in the US are diagnosed with mental illness every year. And we can also correlate those stats with higher suicide rates. And when we talk about Black individuals or African Americans, only 1 in 3 who need mental health care receive it. And why is that? Well, there's distrust in the healthcare system due to the inequalities that have been experienced throughout history. There's lack of insurance and access to care, stigma, lack of provider diversity and cultural competency. So we really lack Black psychiatrists and Black psychologists who can speak with cultural competency towards the other individuals. And then, of course, discrimination. And so when we talk about receiving mental health care, there are certainly inequalities that need to be addressed. And so now I want to take a few minutes to introduce you to Amber. Amber is one of our dedicated volunteers. Our volunteers are the backbone of our organization. They really get out in the community and share their stories and share their personal experiences. And so Amber is going to share a little bit about her background, and then throughout the remaining presentation, she'll answer some questions as it pertains to my slides. And then at the end, we'll offer time for you to ask any questions, either of Amber or of myself. And please know, and Amber will reiterate this, that she's an open book. Our volunteers are really trained to, they want to break down those walls and they want to address stigma. And so they want you to ask the tough questions. And so now I will spotlight Amber and let her share a little bit of her story with you all.
Thank you, Carrie. So as Carrie said, my name is Amber Barnett. I've been a volunteer with NAMI Metro Baltimore for six years now. It's been a while. And just a little bit about myself. I am a queer Black woman. I grew up in a predominantly white area on the Eastern Shore of Maryland. I attended the University of Maryland Eastern Shore for undergrad. It's a historically Black college and university, and also went on to grad school at Morgan State University to get a master's in higher education administration. I'm a 100% an HBCU advocate, making sure that our institutions have what they need and in terms of funding and things like that. Everything that I do is centered around racial equity, racial justice, social justice, restorative practice, and really centering the needs and the voices of those in the community to provide what it is that the community needs. I'm also a poet, a musician, a mentor, a plant mom, a traveler, an empath, which I have to be very careful with. I've been an educator for 7 years. I started in student affairs, working with TRIO programs that serve low-income first-gen students. And then I moved to the college space, more of the college space, working in student activities, planning campus events for students, working in residential life. I taught as an adjunct faculty member for a little while in an ethics course. I have some background teaching middle school students, and most recently I've shifted to the nonprofit space, where I work with an organization that serves a network of community colleges that are really aiming to create more equitable and holistically supportive spaces for their marginalized students. I was diagnosed with anxiety in my senior year of college, and about a year later received a dual diagnosis of major depressive disorder when I relocated to Baltimore. My second diagnosis actually came I found out about that as a result of an ultimatum from a relationship, and my partner became less willing to deal and less tolerant of what I now know as my symptoms, and told me that if I didn't see someone, that our relationship was over. And so really the attempt to save my relationship saved me. In terms of acceptance, it is and it was hard. It's something that I'm still working to deal with. I think that there's an added layer of challenge at the intersection of my Blackness and the stigma that exists within my community. So it's constantly breaking down these walls for myself, for those around me, so that folks understand what it is that I'm living with, and how it is that I can live with this successfully.
Great, thank you, Amber. And you will be hearing more of Amber's story again as we go through the rest of this presentation. Illness often presents as physical symptoms, which can make diagnosis very challenging. It's very common to miss symptoms when you're looking at fatigue and migraines, or having trouble sleeping, or changes in appetite. All of these things can be very common and easy to overlook. So, Amber, can you share, other than this list here, or in particular with this list here, are there any other signs that we've missed? Did you experience any of these symptoms? What did your onset look like of your mental health condition?
Onset of my anxiety looked like it looked like perfectionism, and everything that I had to do had to be structured and perfect. And it was almost obsessive, the way that a lot of things happened in my life. And so I was even down to like not getting text messages back from friends was something that impacted my ability to move through the day. I was not sleeping. And at the time in college, like, you don't think about that. You're like, okay, I don't need to sleep. It's fine. I can sleep for a couple hours and go through the whole day. I was having these like bouts of sweating. Some of the things that you see here, my appetite has always been really funky. Memory loss is one that's not on here that I'd like to highlight, because I think it's one that we don't talk about often, but it impacts me pretty heavily. I have notes here, so if you see me looking to the side, that is something that keeps me on track, but it's probably one of my more frustrating symptoms, by way of the work that I do, and speaking and doing things like that. It's constantly something that I have to retrain myself to be on par with. In terms of my symptoms with my depression, one of the indicators for me was oversleeping and doing a lot of things that were out of character for me. So I think the biggest indicator, when I had my first really bad episode, was that I was coming home from work. Work was the one thing that I was able to functionally do every day. And I would come home and just, take my shoes off, throw everything in the floor, and go straight to my bed. There wasn't really an in-between. I wasn't getting up to go to the bathroom. I wasn't eating. And one day I slept for, it was like 26 hours, and I didn't answer the phone. The phone was ringing. People were calling to check on me, but I think that was when I realized that something was up, and it was almost like I was sucked into the bed and I couldn't move. And I often describe some of these feelings to people as, it feels like you've locked your keys in the house, and you can see your keys, and you know that they're your keys, you know that they're what you need to get in the house, get to wherever you need to go, but you can't get to them. And that's exactly what it feels like to experience some of these symptoms. So of this list, things that I've dealt with or deal with, digestive issues are probably one of my biggest symptoms. In 2018, I had a period of time where I had just a lot of trouble keeping food down. I was in constant stomach pain, probably like 16 hours out of the day on average. I lost 55 pounds, and I got diagnosed with IBS. I had a bunch of tests done. And at the time, I was in a relationship that kept me in a constant state of anxiety, and I realized that that's what was triggering my IBS. And I didn't know that I had it for months. So now I really have to pay attention to the things that trigger me, because my stomach is always the first indicator of an episode or something that is bothering me. My appetite is also directly tied to my IBS. So for as long as I can remember, I've never really been a normal eater. Like I might eat once a day. I've always been someone that prefers smoothies over solid foods or protein shakes. Again, when I'm having those periods of anxiety, I depend heavily on Ensure protein shakes because it's enough to coat my stomach with something, and I can keep those down. And I have to be really intentional about that. Um, Again, the memory loss is something that I struggle with. Trouble sleeping. Sometimes I'll have anxiety attacks in the middle of the night, depending on what my stress and anxiety levels are like. Some days it's just that I can't sleep for longer than a couple of hours. So there have been weeks when I've only slept for 3 hours max every day, and I'm moving, constantly going. And then fatigue, I think I experience pretty regularly as well. The constant, like I'm tired and not being able to explain what the root of that is.
Yeah, thank you for sharing all of that. And Amber touched at the beginning on her college years, and the fact is that age diagnosis for a mental health condition hits right around those college years age, and so many of these signs and symptoms are so easily attributed to just stress and anxiety of starting at a new school and of performance in college, where the likeliness is that it could be actually a mental health condition. Well, I want to talk a little bit about mental health and COVID. COVID has obviously dramatically changed our way of life. And while many are focused on the physical and economic aspects of the pandemic, it's also essential to prioritize how the quarantine has affected people's mental and emotional health. It is common to feel stressed or anxious during this time. And in fact, aren't feeling stressed or anxious, probably be worried about that. But for people who already manage feelings of anxiety or emotional distress, this situation can really exacerbate those symptoms. And recognizing how you are feeling can really help you care for yourself. And while it can be normal, there are times when it can become more. If it's disrupting, if your feelings of anxiety or stress are disrupting your life, it may be a disorder. And occasional worry is normal, chronic worry is not. And we'll get into that a little bit more in just a couple of slides. But I do want to make sure that I also address COVID and racialized communities. The restrictions, well, let me start here. Prior to COVID-19, the U.S. was already in the midst of a mental health crisis just due to increased demand on our system with insufficient response. And the pandemic really has just worsened this issue. History proves that severe illness and death rates tend to be higher for racial and ethnic minority populations during public health emergencies than for other populations. And some of this is due to people are living in densely populated areas, low income and public housing, and multi-generational homes that have trouble with practicing social distancing. Racial trauma has a negative impact on someone's mental and physical health. When we talk about hate crimes and job discrimination and pay inequality, systemic racism, which includes health disparities and microaggressions, racial trauma leads to post-traumatic stress disorder. Psychological stress can lead to physical problems like hypertension, heart attacks, diabetes, and obesity, and all of those disproportionately affect Black people. So when we talk about COVID, it's also important that we talk about the community unrest stemming from years of pervasive racism, how COVID has disproportionately impacted these communities, and then that coupled with this community unrest results in a dual pandemic. And so I want to make sure I clearly define when I use the term dual pandemic what I'm referring to. Amber, can you share your experience of being a Black woman navigating this dual pandemic?
Sure. There's a lot to be said about the intersection of being Black, right, and navigating racism and COVID. Black and brown folks are on the front lines as essential employees and struggle to gain access to healthcare, right? And we have these historical relationships that you mentioned earlier between the Black community and healthcare. You think about the Tuskegee experiment, you think about the theft of Henrietta Lacks cells, you think about the history of gynecology and testing on Black bodies. And how is it that we as a community are to trust the guidance of a system that's historically exploited us in a time when we are one of the most vulnerable populations in this country, right? So we're dealing with a pandemic inside of a pandemic, and what does that do to your psyche? It's a catch-22, and Black folks heal through community. We live through community. We thrive in community and togetherness. And how are we to do those things while we move through uprisings and an awakening of a country when we can't do that? And so we've had to get creative with connection, and it's been an adjustment. And I think one of the hardest things about navigating that, right, is that like this is just another thing to the list of things in which I might lose someone close to me. And knowing that in and of itself is traumatic. And so like constantly working through all of the layers of that, I think has been difficult.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. So, we get often asked right now during this time, because it is so hard to distinguish what are those normal emotions during this very challenging time, and what signifies that you might need more help. And so just these slides give a couple of examples of what is the difference between sadness. We all experience sadness, but when you're sad without reason, or when it impacts your life, such as losing interest in the things that you typically enjoy, it may be time to seek help. Changes in sleep, eating habits, difficulty making decisions, and in particular, if it lasts more than 2 weeks, that is a sign that it could be depression, and it might be time to get some help. And again, who doesn't feel anxious during this time of COVID and community unrest? And so what's the difference with quote unquote normal anxiety versus anxiety disorder? It's not good not to get anxious about things. It is a natural reaction and emotion. And the more we normalize it, the less stigma there will be around discussing it. We've all got that fight or flight response, and that you should have that. And so you should feel some anxiety in your life. But again, if it's starting to disrupt your sleep, if you're having reoccurring nightmares, if you're performing repetitive actions, if you've got constant and chronic worry that is disturbing your social and your work life, then it might be time to seek some assistance. Right now, it's critical, and Amber really bounced back to this, that we connect, and that we feel that we're not in this alone, and that we find a way to connect with others, and that we understand that this loss of control, this feeling that we have is really grief, that we are grieving the loss of our normal right now. Amber, can you share some of the ways that your mental health has been additionally impacted by this pandemic?
Yeah, I think that's such a loaded question, because I'm dealing with COVID, and I'm dealing with racism, and I'm dealing with mental health. So in terms of my mental health, I've experienced increased irritability. And I think some of that is rooted in frustration. Most of that is rooted in frustration, and there's been a disruption of my routine. And it's ironic because I'm a spontaneous person outside of my workplace. I plan everything for work. When I come home, I'm the person that'll text you and say, hey, let's do this tonight. I don't like to plan things. But there's been a disruption in my ability to be spontaneous. And now I have to plan when I go out, if I'm going to go meet up with someone, whatever it is, I have to plan it. And just that feeling of confinement and like a lack of liberation. I think is what I'm really struggling with. I also have found myself really challenged by virtual therapy, because it doesn't feel as effective to me. And I am very much someone who feeds on energy, and I like to feel the atmosphere of a room. And I think that helps me a lot as I'm going through therapy. And so not being able to feel that, and phone conversations and video calls feel pretty impersonal. So I'm struggling with that quite a bit. Um, my focus has been off. I'm typically someone who is very focused, and I found myself struggling to stay focused at work, stay focused in my personal life. I can't watch TV shows anymore. So there's just a lot of like, feels like chaotic energy that I'm trying to figure out how to calm. Um, when we first started quarantine, I really struggled with sleep. I was only getting probably about 4 hours a night. Some of that I thought was because I wasn't moving as much as I was used to, but some of that was probably anxiety. Um, my appetite has also been really up and down as we've been in quarantine. I know when we first went into quarantine, everybody was buying flour and everybody was baking and we were all making things. And now I've gotten to a point where I'm just like, I'm tired of food. I don't want to eat anything. Um, so those are probably the biggest ways in terms of um, dealing with racism. I think that there's been this constant consumption of trauma with the added layer of stillness, right? So this is not anything that's new. These are things that have been happening, but because we're all forced to sit still, we're seeing them and people are seeing them for the first time. And the ease and the disproportionate rate at which we socially share and view violence against Black and brown bodies has a severe impact on those of us who look like and share identities with the folks being victimized. And so when I do the work that I do, like I said, none of these things are new, but I think that we've become desensitized to seeing these videos shared on social media or shared on the news, videos that are violence against Black and brown bodies in the form of police brutality or sexual trauma, health disparities, educational disparities. And so trying to figure out what to do with that on top of a on top of COVID, on top of managing my own mental health is really hard because you can't compartmentalize things that intersect. Um, and so I'm constantly working to figure out how to do that and giving myself, being patient with myself and allowing myself time to step away from things has been really important just because there's so much of me that wants to be on the front line, but also having to protect my own mental health.
Yeah. Absolutely. And you just spoke a little bit about that sort of news consumption, and I think that is a really solid tip for during this time. I mean, generally, it's a good idea to stay engaged and informed, but it can become overwhelming during this time, and when you are constantly being inundated with information about COVID and about racial injustice and about community trauma, it can become too much. And so taking breaks from news consumption is important, setting limits on how much time you spend, and some other tips, following daily habits and routines, making sure that you move your body every day, whatever that means for you, and taking breaks, getting regular sleep. That's critical for your immune system. And so some of these practices can help you with your mental health. I mentioned exercise and movement, practicing meditation and mindfulness. There's some great apps out there now that are free or low cost to use for meditation and mindfulness that can also help. Amber, are there any additional ways that you've managed your mental health during normal times? And then are there additional ways that you are now managing your mental health during this crisis?
Yeah, I am normally I am an incredibly social person. I am at all of the music festivals and I am traveling and I'm spending time with friends and I'm at open mic nights and all of those things require me to be around people. So right now I am still trying to figure it out. I'm still struggling. And like I said, the virtual environment has not been conducive to me. So like, a lot of things have shifted. Open mics are happening on Instagram and on Facebook Live. And they just don't feel the same. Again, the energy is different. I haven't been able to produce as much as an artist. I feel like that has been stifled a little bit. you know, traveling is out the window. So I'm still figuring that out. I think what has been really helping me is music, listening to music, and taking drives. Honestly, I love driving, and it's something that is so liberating. And we were talking a little earlier just about being outside and experiencing nature. And so, like, watching this meteor shower over the last 2 days has been something that I've found peace in. So I've really had to be open-minded and think outside of the box to do some of those things by myself that still make me feel connected to the world and connected to people.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so important. And you're right. Gosh, who knew you could enjoy it so much now, huh? So I want to talk about stigma in the workplace, which is why many of you joined us today, really is to hear about navigating mental health concerns in the workplace. What we know is that workplace stigma can lead to teasing and harassment, lack of advancement opportunities, discrimination. Fear of stigma can impact an individual's decision to tell a supervisor, their willingness to access treatment, or their ability to manage a family member's illness. It's important to know that mental disorders do not interfere with all capacities. And in fact, they can sometimes improve an employee's performance at work. You know, I can assure you that Amber walking into any of your workplaces as an employee would be a stellar employee for you all. So certainly it does not affect the capacity to work. And it's important for employers to understand that mental illnesses are not moral failings. They are not something that someone can just snap out of. They are serious and debilitating and sometimes deadly medical conditions, like any others. And, you know, in many of our lifetimes, we can remember stigma that surrounded cancer or AIDS, you know, and scientific research and education are what helped these prejudices give way to understanding, and we are looking for the same with mental health conditions. Even though in the community it is far more common to hear individuals talking about mental health and promoting mental health in the workplace, it is still a very scary thing for someone with a mental health condition to speak up. And so I applaud you all for being here today and listening to this and learning about ways that you can break down those barriers. Work is more than a means of material support for individuals living with a mental health condition. It's also a major way that individuals stay mentally healthy and socially integrated. So a workplace is an important place for daily structure and routine. It gives an individual a sense of self and belonging, and sets meaningful goals and opportunities for friendship and social support. And so all of that is to say, having gainful employment is an important part of an individual's recovery process as well. And having an employer that can support that recovery process is critical. And so now more than ever, we have to listen to our colleagues and try to identify some of those signs and symptoms in the workplace. These on the screen are a few of the possible warning signs of a mental health condition that you might see in the workplace. You know, and even now, even in this virtual environment, if you're on a phone call with someone and they are having problems concentrating or, you know, focusing on the information that you're sharing with them, if they are getting irrationally angry over something that normally they wouldn't. If they're having a hard time understanding a concept that you're getting across, it's possible you're just being a confusing person, but it's also possible that they're experiencing something beyond that. If someone, when you were in person working with them, was never late to meetings and always showed up and turned on their tasks in time and were a great performer, and now working remote, you are seeing that they are missing meetings and they are not paying attention on calls and they're not turning in work on time, or it's sloppy work, it might not just be that they aren't good at working from home, which I think is a really easy excuse right now to say, like, oh, this working from home thing just isn't so good for her. It could be more than that. And so it's important to feel comfortable talking about these signs and symptoms. I've put up here a box that says the employer's role is not to diagnose a mental health condition, but it is to embrace a stigma-free workplace and a culture where you are comfortable in talking about it. So Amber, can you share your experience with mental health in the workplace, ways your employer was or was not supportive when you were diagnosed?
Sure. So I have had the honor of having incredibly supportive supervisors in my professional career, my entire professional career. When I started with TRIO programs, my supervisor was actually a licensed therapist and picked up on a lot of my symptoms before I knew they were symptoms. And this was before I had received my second diagnosis. And so he was very patient with me, very communicative. He asked all the right questions, and really just holding space was the most important thing. And without that feeling judgmental or feeling like I was being accused of anything. And so he's actually some of the reason why I was connected with the therapist that I got connected to because of his network and just recognizing where I was really struggling. Working in student activities was a little different. That role is very high touch with students. Students literally had access to me probably 12 hours a day. And there's a lot of involvement and having to have energy and having to listen to students' struggles, whatever they are, and trying to balance that with my own home life, right? So if I'm coming to work and I'm not having such a great day, but I have a student who is also falling apart, how do I manage that? And again, I had a supervisor who could pick up on those signs and kind of shift a student, step in and say that I may not have the capacity to do that today, or literally just give me the green light to close my door for the day and do things that I needed to do, catch up on email or plan an event, and making sure that students were redirected elsewhere. So I feel like I have had really good support in terms of supervisors. I just started a new position, so that has been interesting. I started while we were in quarantine, so I don't think that my supervisor knows me as well yet, which is difficult when you're talking about some of the things that Carrie mentioned in terms of like noticing that work is off, right? So this is a new position for me. I'm also in my probation period. We're in the middle of a pandemic. So what happens if my productivity is not what it normally is? So now it looks like this is just the employee that I am. So that is something that I've been trying to balance and have done a really good job. Again, I'm grateful that I am working for an organization and have a supervisor who's very understanding and open to having those conversations and accessible if you are struggling with something. And you know, the organization offers lots of resources if you need support in that regard. In terms of experiencing symptoms in the workplace, I think most of those showed up when I was doing the on-the-ground work, which I'm less hands-off with students now. But again, the irritability was probably the most prevalent thing. Like if I was just not having a good day, it was very hard for me to hide that because I wear my heart on my sleeve. And so, you know, it is really hard for me to put a student's issue ahead of my own irritability or my own frustrations and be able to walk them through that when honestly I needed someone to walk me through something too. So it was difficult to balance being symptomatic. And oftentimes when you are experiencing symptoms in the workplace, they come off as problematic personality traits. And I think these are the times when you need your colleagues and your supervisors and your leadership to listen with their eyes, because we need to be granting grace and giving folks the benefit of the doubt, especially now when things are not characteristically them, and believing that they may need support or additional help in some area, as opposed to that just being a change in character, or that just being some flawed personality trait we haven't seen yet.
Absolutely. Um, Amber and I had a brief conversation about how challenging it must be for individuals who are starting new jobs in the middle of this pandemic, and the grace that is needed from an employer to give to those individuals during this time, as they get acclimated. So how can employers open the lines of communication now in this crisis situation that we're working in? I've put up a picture here, and I think it is just so key, that first point, that we're not just working from home. We are working from home during a crisis. We're at home during a crisis trying to work, and everyone is doing their best that they can, but that is really going to change the picture of how we are working right now. So how can we promote a supportive culture in the workplace? Asking directly the question. There should be no vagueness around trying to address a mental health issue. How many of us just passed someone in the hall when we were at work and just said, "Hey, how are you?" And the response back is fine. That person may not be fine. If you're not stopping and saying, how can I support you right now today? I've noticed XYZ. Is something going on? And we can do that now over the phone, starting out our conversations on the phone with really asking how someone is doing and listening to the response. Avoiding labels is so important. We are so quick to throw out words like, "Oh, she was acting so crazy today." Trying to avoid those labels that can be truly hurtful to someone who is living with a mental health condition. So making sure that our terminology is respectful is important. Offering tips to your employees around working from home. Structure makes us feel more stable. So when your work routine changes, it may be helpful to create other routines that mirror what you would usually do. So having rituals and routines that start your day, dedicating a space for work that has few distractions, scheduling times for when you work and when you take a break, and prioritizing self-care activities. Working from home, it can be easier to work longer hours than usual, and instead try to create a boundary between your work time and your after work time. And as an employer, that's something that you can really enforce with your employees as well and set the example. Not spending time with colleagues can be challenging. This can be especially isolating for individuals with a mental health condition and for people who are living alone. And while nothing can replace that, using technology is so important. So if you can call someone on a virtual call and see their face and speak to them, that's so important. And again, I'll reiterate, talk to your work colleagues about subjects that are not just work related and not just COVID related or social unrest related. Talk to them about their hobbies and what they've done and how they're doing. That sort of water cooler talk in the office that happens so naturally creates those open lines of communications, breaks down boundaries, and allows individuals to feel comfortable talking about what else might be going on and what might be deeper. Amber, I think what we'll do here is let me ask you if you've got any additional suggestions now for supervisors who may be managing remote employees with mental health concerns onset by the crisis. And then I'll go on to just wrap us up real quick so that everyone can ask questions. We've got about 15 minutes left, and I do want to make sure that we allow time for anyone who has questions for us as well. So are there any other suggestions that you've got that you can tell supervisors that might be on this call or for coworkers of how to help manage remote employees?
I think that I would echo everything that you said. Really heavy on listening beyond words and listening with your eyes, because there's so much that people say that can get easily missed that is loaded. So pay attention to what people are saying, but more importantly, what they're not saying. And really leverage your relationships with people to make sure that you're checking in on people. And like you said, asking those questions beyond, talking about COVID and beyond talking about work and beyond talking about what's happening in the world. Ask people what's happening with them, and be graceful and understanding. I would also say to recognize that video fatigue is a thing. And
Yes.
it is also incredibly anxiety inducing for a lot of people to be on camera, myself included. I think that I have found that we're paying so much attention to being on camera and what people are looking at and what they can see. And like the small things that you don't pay attention to in an in-person meeting are now larger things, like fixing my hair or looking out the window or taking a drink of water. So just again, have grace with people not wanting to be on camera, because this isn't a time to be micromanaging. People really need the space to deal how they're dealing. Again, being mindful of language, things like I'm going crazy at home, being on camera, are things that are really sensitive to some folks. And I think that one thing I often think about is that the irony is that we're acknowledging that this is our new normal without actually giving space to grieve what normal once was, right? So we're constantly in meetings where people are like, this is our new normal, but back to business as usual. So we haven't really taken the time to breathe and say, okay, this is how we've had to shift. And we're constantly in go mode that doesn't actually allow us to sit with the changes and process those things. So creating that space for folks to do that how they need to, and recognize that everyone's not going to process this the same way, is also really important. If you have anyone who's starting their position mid-pandemic, I think the one thing that was really helpful for me was that my supervisor scheduled a lot of meetings with folks that I would be working with regularly, not to talk through what we'd be doing at work, but literally just to sit down and get to know one another, because it is a lot easier to meet with people every day when the foundation of your conversation was not work. And you had a chance to know where they're from, or like, and again, you don't have to overshare, but just something that breaks the ice. Because now that I think about it, my position is remote through January right now, but I literally have not met any of my coworkers, and that'll be almost a year for me. And so I'll have to have a first day a year after my first day. And so these are things that we've not had to navigate before and not had to think about before. And so they're going to be new, and we're not going to do them perfectly. But I think the important thing is doing things, and not just trying to plan to do them perfectly. Just know that we have to be patient, and we have to be forgiving, and we have to make space to make these mistakes and just learn how to move differently. I think that, if you are managing someone who is supervising someone who is newer, it is important to help them understand what workplace culture is, because I think I spent a lot of time early on trying to figure out what I'm supposed to do on camera, or what the norm on camera was before COVID. And if I turn my camera off, what will they think about me? If I say this, what will they think about me? If I chat this way, what will they think about me? So those are some of the like unspoken things that I wish I had known, because I spent so much time obsessing over what they were, what I was supposed to be doing. And then connect them to people that you ask them who they would like to be connected to, if anyone, because I also think that was helpful. I've been connected to Black women in my organization, and it's been so helpful in so many ways. So trying to be intentional about building those connections, and not really leaving folks kind of out to every man for himself kind of thing.
Those are great tips. Thank you, Amber. I will quickly just slides have suddenly decided they don't want to click forward anymore, which maybe that's a sign that we need to go to. No. So just finding mental health care. A couple of slides here, but what I will say is someone had asked in the Q&A if we can send out the slides. I'm happy to do that, and Greg is recording this as well, and so happy to have him share these, and that way you'll have access to these healthcare resources, crisis services, and then what we provide at NAMI Metro Baltimore, which is support groups for individuals living with a mental health condition, as well as family members, classes for individuals who are living with a mental health condition, classes for family members, a helpline that is operated from 9 to 5 every day. So you can call and find out more about our programs, our mental health resources, and other resources in the community if you're looking for access to other resources out there. We do a lot of these presentations in the community. We are open to coming into your employer and doing different presentations based around what you might be interested in doing. So please feel free to reach out to us as well. And I'm going to scoot on now to the question and answer to make sure that we save time for that. So Greg, I'll turn it over to you for any questions out there.
All right, thank you. My computer just did something funky. I hope you can hear me okay.
Yep.
Oh, good. Okay. I had a few. I know if anyone wants to ask a question, feel free to use the raise hand function. We can unmute you or just chat us or use the Q&A. We just have a few minutes. One of my questions for you, Amber, is to what extent when you go to a new employer do you talk openly about your past mental illness or your current challenges?
I think for me that's a hard one. Because I am so open and I really do want my employer to understand when I'm struggling, but I recognize that all spaces are not safe spaces. So for me, it starts when I interview somewhere. That's one of the things I look for. My supervisor is one of the most important people when I interview. And I'm really looking for someone who is giving me signals that they are emotionally safe in that way, that I am able to share something like that. So I think for me, I usually try to ease into the conversation, and I may drop some gems when we have one-on-ones. But usually it doesn't come up until I'm struggling. And then I have that conversation if I feel like I need time off, or if something was said that I found to be offensive. Sometimes it comes up then. But it really is a case-by-case thing, and I really go on what I feel and how I'm feeling, and whether or not I feel like my supervisor is someone who is safe enough for me to share that information with.
Right. I mean, Carrie, is there a NAMI guidance on such a topic? In other words, do you provide a best practice for someone who has mental illness? Is it a good or bad idea to disclose that when you're looking for a job?
Yeah, unfortunately, we recognize that there is still so much stigma and lack of understanding in the workplace that I think Amber's approach is the right approach in terms of really feeling out your employer. That being said, you have rights as an individual with a health condition, just like any other health condition. And so if you are experiencing discrimination or you aren't getting the benefits that someone else would receive, if you get turned down for time off for a doctor's appointment that's a psychiatrist appointment versus a regular physician appointment, those are all things that you should take action on. And absolutely you should be speaking up. But we at NAMI understand why there's a fear for employees to talk about their mental health condition, and certainly wouldn't promote someone just without confidence walking into a new employer and disclosing it. You don't have to do that with any other health condition, right? I mean, right. You don't have to walk into an employer and say, I've got heart disease, look at me. So you shouldn't have to do that with a mental health condition either, because you can be a very effective employee. So Amber's approach, I think, is the right one, in that if it is starting to affect how your performance is in the workplace, that might be a time when you need to then acknowledge that with your employer and say, it's more than just, I'm not just distracted. There are other things going on. I have a diagnosable condition. I need you to work with me with reasonable accommodation for my condition.
Yeah.
Different, Greg, I think, than any other.
Yeah, thank you for addressing that. And I didn't say right away when I started asking questions, but I wanted to thank both of you for your expertise and your candor, and Amber for your vulnerability and willingness to share your story. I think it's so important for all of us to hear. And I wanted to ask you a follow-up about you said you had a supervisor years ago who held space for you, and that person was really important and good to you. Can you just go a level deeper on what that means?
So I think that what I really appreciated was that he didn't hijack the space. And for me, what that meant is if we needed to just sit in silence, that's exactly what we did. If I needed, it was the conversation and the space was guided by what I needed, even if I didn't know what I needed in that moment. And if it was that I didn't know what I needed, he asked questions to figure out, to help me get to figure out what it is that I need or what it is that I'm feeling or how it is that I get through the days, or if a couple of days off would help me recenter. But for me personally, I know holding space for people looks very different. But for me, it was just being empowered to take control over the space that was being held for me, and knowing that that was not someone else telling me what I needed to do or what I should do. It was somebody listening to what I needed and being willing to respond in the ways that they could, and or connect me to whatever it is that I needed that they would not be able to provide.
Thank you. I appreciate you clarifying that. It's an interesting, I haven't heard that it sort of phrased that way. Holding space is an interesting thing to think about. And I think a lot of us rush to fill silence with words, and sometimes maybe just being silent is a good approach. And at the risk of violating that, while we have just a couple minutes left, you also said, another one I wrote down was listen with your eyes, which is another phrase I don't think I've used, but I like it a lot. And maybe just give us a little more detail there. Like if you're coaching employers and colleagues on how to listen with your eyes. I think I know what you mean, but can you just talk about that for a minute?
Yeah. So when you ask someone how they're doing, for instance, and they're like, I'm fine, but you see this, or you see like things that are like indications that the I'm fine is masking something else. Be careful about how you dig into it, but dig into it. And it is such a nuanced thing because the wrong thing could make anybody shut down. The wrong question could make anybody shut down. And I could easily take offense to, someone being very direct and saying, well, why are you playing with your fingers like that? So when I say that, I mean to pay attention to those things, but also be very mindful about how you address them. And I don't know that there's an easy way to say that or to give you any specific guidance or directive on what that looks like or how to do that, but really pay attention to the things that are not being said, because I think that there's so much about human nature that we just can't hide, even when what we're saying is supposed to be doing that.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's a different approach with someone who's a close relationship versus someone who you haven't established that with.
Definitely.
So we're coming up to the. Sorry, Amber, did you have a follow up to that?
Yeah, I think there are times when even if you're not close to someone, if you feel comfortable reaching out to someone who is close to them and saying, hey, I met with this person earlier and I noticed this. I don't know if they talk to you. I know you two have this relationship. It may be something you want to follow up on. It may be something they've already talked to you about, but I just wanted to reach out because I was concerned. I was worried.
Thank you. Well, we are about to hit the hour, so let me not forget to thank you guys so much for your time and your insights. Carrie, if you can share the slides with me, I can share them or a link to them or however you want to handle attendees and those who signed up. I will note that we recorded the conversation. We'll send that out, and you can feel free to share that as a resource. And if you'd like more information about NAMI Metro Baltimore, just Google NAMI Metro Baltimore. I'm sure you'll find it in the website resources. And the last thing I'll leave you with is we will have a webinar in August, and the topic will be who can you trust? It will be a panel about news, fake news, and everything in between. So we're really going to get into it in terms of what's happening in the media business today and how sources are both trusted and not trusted, and it should be very interesting. All right, and with that, I'm going to thank everyone for attending and say we'll see you later. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Carrie. Thanks, Amber.
Thank you.
Thank you.